And then this past year I went individual.
All right. My name is Andrea Nisler. I unfortunately did not play any sports in college, but I found CrossFit after. I just did it for fun. Started in 2013, just went like a few times a week. And in 2014, I went over to this gym called Timberwolf and kind of have been there since a little bit. I went to the games with them in 2014, 16, 17, and then this past year, I moved to Davenport, Iowa for the season. I went to the games with Team OC3 Black.
Yeah. And you guys did okay, right?
And yeah, we ended up third, so that was fun.
It's pretty good.
Best finish yet.
Yeah. Very cool. So again, kind of the goal for this podcast, I want to interview with these athletes. I've worked with Andrea for maybe a little bit over a year. I think I get lost in time, and then Paige probably like maybe 6-ish months, 6 to 9-ish months. I kind of think of things more as CrossFit seasons than like years at this point. But trying to just really decipher maybe some habits, behaviors of, these are probably two of my best 3 athletes. I work with a lot of CrossFit athletes that are aspiring to be what used to be regionals athletes or games athletes. And these are 2 people that have been there a very long time. So I think just kind of listening to these people, what they have to say, can be beneficial for a lot of my clients and other people who are interested, right? You're back, don't worry. So again, kind of with that. So I think a lot of people probably listening to this and just in general are fairly new to CrossFit, maybe a year or 2 in. You guys were at that point at once, right? So maybe each of you giving me an example of either training or nutrition mistake that you made in your first few years of CrossFit that maybe seems a little bit silly to you now.
Sure. I will start with this. So actually, when I first started, so I guess a little background is I had an eating disorder before CrossFit. So going into it, my mindset was still kind of in that arena, and I wouldn't eat a lot before I'd go to classes, and then I'd try to kind of skip meals throughout the day at work, knowing I'd be going to like the 6 p.m. class, and I would just get there and die. I mean, obviously, well, most people know you have to eat food to have fuel and gain muscle. So that was a mistake I made for probably like a good 2 years. I was just not eating enough.
Right. And you still were at the CrossFit Games not eating food.
Well, 2014 was a different kind of year for games. I mean, you had to be decent, but you didn't have to be great.
Right.
Put it that way.
Yeah.
I think on the opposite end of that, you do CrossFit and you think you can eat whatever you want because you're working so hard. So I was kind of on that end of it where I would have, I would eat normal throughout the day. I'd go to CrossFit. I'd work out really, really hard. And I'm like, oh, I could do whatever I want for dinner. So I would do whatever I wanted for dinner. Not necessarily saying I gained or lost weight that way. But body composition wise, it's not the most ideal thing you can do. So nutritionally, that was a learning curve.
Right.
Over time, evolving your nutrition and your decisions. And then on the training aspect of it, the warming up, cooling down, the mobility stuff, I didn't know how important that was until I really got into it competitively.
Right. Yeah, I think on what Paige mentioned about the idea that you went and did a very hard 12, 15-minute Metcon and how you feel after that is very much like you need to like overfuel yourself, right? And certainly at your guys' level, when you're training multiple hours a day, the rules change a little bit with how many carbs you guys eat, with, having carbs around your training. But for a lot of people that working out like an hour a day, if they go do some back squats and do a 12-minute Metcon, they don't need to like slam a Gatorade after they train, right? I think it confuses people a little bit because you could go do like an hour of, easy lifting and easy cardio and not feel like you're that trash, but you do a 15-minute AMRAP and you feel trash. You feel like you need a whole bunch of this food, but that's a mistake a lot of people make, is then having additional 500 calories from that and kind of overdoing it, not really seeing any body composition changes if they're a little bit lower volume athlete. Cool. And again, both of you have been tracking macros with myself or even before that. So maybe share a couple of examples of what you guys think the biggest benefits for you of tracking macros.
I just like being accountable or held accountable by someone. If I don't, I will tend to just eat carbs all day and avoid protein. My body doesn't crave the protein. So I think tracking macros in that way, it really opened my eyes to how I need to blend things together. I was definitely I just wasn't getting enough before.
Right.
I just like the flexibility of it. I can get ready for bed, and the night before I can plan out my entire day of eating based on my macros. And if I have any certain plans, I can plan around them, and I can just make sure that I'm eating enough and I'm not overdoing it if I go out to eat somewhere. So I like routine. I like being organized and planning. So it's the easiest way for me to do it.
Right. Yeah, I think that's cool. You guys had different aspects on that. And I think with working with clients, there's obviously some things that are more popular than others, but there's a lot of just seemingly random things that people benefit from, right? Like Andrea saying, I was probably underdoing protein before I was tracking, just kind of eat intuitively, because intuitively for people is very different, right? Intuitively for Andrea, it could be like a whole bunch of carbs and not enough protein. Like for somebody else, it could be very high fat and not enough carbs, right? So I do think for a lot of people, just tracking their macros helps identify what their issue was. And then touching upon what Paige said too, for also people like yourselves who are very high achievers, want to be doing everything possible to reaching your full potential. When you have something kind of numerical of my goal, just like with training, right? If someone says, okay, you need to row under a 7-minute 2K, like you have a tangible goal of what to do, and then maybe 8-minute for females, I forget. And then you guys are probably surely set way under 8, but it helps to kind of have that goal in your head, right? Just like with carbs, if you say, okay, I need you to have 340 grams of carbs today, you can say like, okay, I met my carb intake, I kind of hit that threshold, right? As opposed to just eating more based on intuition and feel. You can trick yourself of like, should I have more for dinner or less for dinner? There's a part of that with tracking your macros, right? Where you guys have like a range and you guys have higher days. Like for you particular, you guys both have like off days or regular training days or hard training days. You sort of select which intake you're at. So there's some intuition there, but I think what Paige touched on as far as it makes it a little bit simpler of like you check the box for meeting nutrition that day, right? Something else I wanted to touch upon, I think with people that get into tracking macros initially, they have the misconception that it's super rigid, right? Like you have to have 62 grams of fat exactly, and you have to weigh out every single meal, right? And I think maybe you guys probably had that initially when you started tracking, and you've learned sort of how to particularly go and eat out and estimate things. So how do you guys individually balance tracking your macros, right? Just the holidays came up. So when you travel, when you go and eat out, do you have any particular tips with not being so OCD about any specific number, and then how you do that?
Yeah, and as you start to track longer, you get to know like certain desserts that maybe are lower in fat than others that you didn't know about. So when you're at a restaurant, everyone's ordering dessert, maybe you get that dessert. Or just foods in general that I didn't know maybe were so high in fat. I try and avoid those going to restaurants because they're usually even higher in fat than when you make them at home.
Right.
So I never go to a restaurant and avoid ordering with my friends or family. It's really just finding things that are healthier when you make them at home, and then kind of estimate a little bit higher when you're at the restaurant.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think along with that too, leading up to if you go out to dinner with your friends or your family, you're eating well before you get there. So you're eating enough veggies throughout the day. You have enough protein. Usually when you go out to eat, if you're at a party, protein sources are usually lacking. So maybe not when you go out to dinner, but at parties and things like that. So just knowing that you ate enough before you get there, that way you're not going off the rails when you're there too. You're feeling full and you're feeling satiated. Just kind of helps a little bit. So I make sure, even on like holidays, like Christmas Eve, I go over to my family's house for dinner. But in the morning, I have oatmeal, I have some veggies, I have some protein. Like I have a sound meal, and then I'll probably have another lunch if it's a later dinner. Or if it's an evening meal, it's probably the only meal I'll eat beforehand. I'll have something after I train, and then I'll go to my family's. But balance is really important. If you tell yourself you can't eat something, you're going to drive yourself nuts.
Yeah.
So I think over time, I think we've both learned that, you know, being on a team with Andrea last year, we were pretty flexible with our diet, but, you know, we knew when to you know, track down our meals when we needed to. So we knew when to dial it in and when we could dial it back.
Right. Yeah, and I think oh, go ahead, Andrea.
Oh, I was going to say, like, for instance, last night, my family went out to this restaurant. I knew I was going with them, and I love their burgers. So knowing that that's probably not the healthiest option on the menu, I made sure that I was on track for breakfast and lunch with protein and not really treating myself during the day.
Was it Red Cow?
No, it was Surly Brewing Company. Great burgers.
That's a new one.
Dang. I'm a sucker for a good burger. Or really pretty much anything. Yeah, I do think what you guys mentioned about that is a little bit counterintuitive to people. I try to educate people on what you guys are obviously practicing with. If you have, say, a dinner, which tends to be the meal people eat out the most often, can mess up the most often. A lot of people will say, okay, I'm not going to have lunch so I can save up my calories for dinner, or not have breakfast or whatever. And on paper, that can work, right? Because you're essentially skipping 600 calories for lunch, then you go into dinner. But you're also putting yourself into an environment with a whole bunch of really tasty foods in a social situation. Yeah. And now you're even more hungry than you would have been going into that, right? So some of my clients, and this goes back to the idea that there are principles that people do, but you kind of have to find out individually what principles can work for you, right? So the overall principle is like not going massively over your calorie needs for that day, right? And I think most people do a better job doing that with having very, very healthy foods throughout the day. That way, when they get to that meal, they don't overdo the entire portion. And if you're super hungry, you can just kind of go crazy there. So I think that's a really good tip there. So kind of switching gears to more competitive CrossFit, your guys' ideas, thoughts upon that. So again, Andrea, 4 times at the games? 5?
Yeah.
4?
Team. Nope, 4 times.
Okay, so 4 times as a team athlete, best place 3rd. And Paige has been there twice, 1 on the team, 1 as an individual. I don't know if Paige mentioned this. She probably did. She also played ice hockey at Ohio State, which is a pretty competitive thing to do, I guess. So you both have been for several years either with hockey or CrossFit at a pretty high level, right? And I think there's probably a lot of similarities between a good basketball player and a good CrossFitter and a good hockey player, right? More so than just what all CrossFitters have in common, right? I think the eliteness is probably what stands out the most. So, again, going back to probably a lot of these people listening that follow you guys are aspiring to be around the level you guys are. And are there any particular traits? It could be with how you train, how you think about training, how you think about recovery, anything like that. Any particular traits that you guys see among yourselves or obviously among your peers you compete with that's a little bit different from what you see at people that maybe haven't made regionals or maybe just stuck a little bit lower on the competitive realm?
Sure. So this is going to sound really weird and crazy, but it's usually the thing that's in the forefront of your mind of like everything you do, you kind of think, how will this affect my training? Or is this a smart idea to do this now since I have certain competition coming up? So yes, I still have a life outside of it, but for some reason when I wake up, it's always what am I going to train today? How can I make that the best training day possible? And then kind of how is it going to affect me later for whatever I have coming up?
Right.
So I think the difference is, other people wake up and they're like, oh, I got to go to work today. Great. I get to do this after work. Those thoughts don't really come through my mind until I've gone through all the training stuff.
Right.
That I'll be doing for the day.
Yeah. So, you kind of you at least prioritize. Both of you have jobs, right? But you're prioritizing it in the sense of like, hey, and this happens, I think, with a lot of people who just want to go train hard. I think that's the answer, is just to train as hard as you can every day. What I'm hearing from you is like you're thinking, okay, on team stuff on Saturday, we're doing a whole bunch of worm lunges. So on Friday, I'm not going to do 150 wall balls, right? You're kind of thinking about the concept of your week of like, hey, what do I need to hit? What do I need to stay fresh with for the entire context?
Or like, how much training do I have? I need to allow enough time in my day. Like maybe if I got to cut something out. So say I was maybe going to go to a movie after work. If I didn't get all my training done in the morning, not going to the movie anymore.
Right.
Like, you'll be going back to the gym.
Right. So just prioritizing and scheduling and planning. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think going individual really kind of opens your eyes a little bit. Going team, there's no doubt about it. It is hard. It is a lot of work. You have 4 or 5, 3, whatever it is, other people counting on you and wanting to know that you are putting your best foot forward every single time. But going individual was different. It was different physically, mentally. You really kind of see, you see the top athletes in there, like doing their thing. You see Tia, recovering and getting warmed up for every single event. You see all these athletes doing that, and you really see what it takes. So as far as physical, you're always ready to push yourself. You know that you're going to have a long day. For me with Misfit, I have 4 to 5 training pieces a day. I know that I can't give 110% to every single piece. So what Gabe and I have done is we'll pick a piece that gets the most intensity out of the day. And then everything else kind of, falls back from there a little bit. That doesn't mean to say I'm not focused throughout it or I'm not focusing on, my technique or my snatches, but certain times of the season is different. So right now, leading into Wodapalooza, intensity needs to be high. So my Metcons need to be a forefront of that. So that gets a lot of my attention, and I, focus on strategy and things like that. So the mental side is there too. Your focus needs to be there. You have to be willing to hurt and struggle and train alone. And there's just a lot of things to it that, you have to be willing to accept. And as far as recovery, you need to have every little detail covered. Graston tools, like soft tissue stuff, dry needling, Normatec, all that stuff comes in handy. And if you're not taking advantage of your resources, then you're not doing everything you can.
Right. You're leaving no stone unturned of what could help you 1% the following day. And
right.
So yeah, both of you have individual coaches. Paige more recently with after the Open of this past year, mm-hmm. correct?
Yep.
Gabe from Misfit. And then Andrea, you've been with Evan from Training Think Tank for a pretty long time, right?
Been with them for 3.5 years, yeah.
Yeah, so what were you, I don't know the answer to this question, so it'll be interesting. What were each of you doing prior to working with an individual coach? And what was a major difference that you saw when you did switch over to having sort of a structured program and a communication with somebody?
Great question. So before, I was doing just everything. So I'd go into the gym, I'd do the class workouts, and I'd look at comp train, and I'd do comp train stuff. And then maybe someone else was doing a fun workout, and I'd join them on that. It was really stupid. I burned out so hard. So after our 2015 season, when we didn't make it, I kind of stepped back, and I was like, what can I do to get better? So someone that was on my team at the time suggested Training Think Tank. So that's been really great. And it's actually taught me that not less intensity, but less volume
Right.
In a day can actually be super beneficial.
Right.
And you don't have to go so hard and do like 8 Metcons in a day.
Right.
So so right now, I mean, I maybe hit 1 to 3 Metcons in a day, focusing a lot on lifting at the moment, but not always. And then recovery, like not even just like the tools Paige was talking about, but like just different stretches and different accessory work that I would have never done before.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, I was kind of the same way. When you start CrossFit, obviously you drink the Kool-Aid, you want to go to the class.
All the Metcons.
Yeah, so, and, I did classes all the time, and I loved it. I loved being with the community in general, so that was easy, but I always wanted to do more, so I added lifting into it, and I was the same way. I would look through CompTrain, I would look through all those free online programs that are out there. I followed a little bit of Misfit before I even knew it was Misfit. And then in 2016, when I qualified as an individual, the owner of my gym decided that she would help me and do my programming for me. So that took off really, really well. And I went from barely making it to regionals and being in like 29th and still getting an invite to finishing 14th in the region. So I had a lot of success in that first year. So we decided, take it into another year, which took me to Timberwolf. And the 6 of us still kind of followed our own programming. So I was still working with Kalina from our gym. And then after the season, we decided to take a step back from that because the gym was building and growing. So I decided to follow the blog from Misfit through the Open. I had a strong feeling I would qualify, so I knew that if I just had structure, that's really all I needed. And then from there, I signed up with Misfit, and I worked with Gabe leading up to regionals and then through the game. So It's been a lot of change, but a lot of really good change. And same thing, I love structure. I love routine. I've really gotten into the Misfit mindset. And, you have a set warm-up, a lifting piece, a Metcon, an interval piece. Their stuff is so different and varied that, you're not leaving one thing out.
Right.
Especially the bitch work. So I actually, when I was following the blog, I kind of avoided it. And then, like right now, especially, I've really kind of dialed it in, and I embrace it. So that's come a long way because, monostructural pieces, the rower, the bike, running, that stuff wasn't my strong suit, but you got to embrace it somehow. So
yeah, and I think that kind of comes back to the question beforehand about what's kind of a separator for people like yourselves to people that want to be as good as you. I do think a lot of people do fall into that because it makes sense. If I train more, if someone else is doing 2 Metcons and I do 4, I should get better than them, right? But you don't really have that intensity to put to every single piece, especially with how the old format was with the Open. The Open's literally 1 workout a week. You have to be able to push hard for 6 to 15 minutes, usually something like that, right? It's not about who can, at the games, that's certainly more of a war of attrition of how many events can you do in a day and maintain things. But most people should not be thinking about how can I train for the CrossFit games? They can't even make it to regionals, right?
Yeah.
And
old regional.
Right. Or even, same thing with all the sanctioned events now, like it's, 6 workouts over the course of 2 or 3 weeks. It's still about intensity. How can you put it down in 10 minutes? So I do think that.
In addition to that too, if you're not consistency is huge, if you're bouncing from Misfit to CompTrain to something you made up yourself, you're leaving a lot out because most likely you're biased and you're doing the things that you like. So I have, 1 to 5 pieces a week with Misfit that I dislike, but guess what? I have to do it because it's going to make me better. There's movements that I'm not good at and I need to do them 1,000 million times to get better at them. So, you have to force yourself to do that stuff that you don't want to do.
Yeah, I think that is a mindset shift too, because a lot of people, pretty much everyone that I know of, started CrossFit because it was fun, right? And very few people started CrossFit with I'm going to make money doing this or be very competitive at doing this. maybe they had that in the back of their mind. They still enjoyed doing it originally. And then I think there's kind of a curve where the better you get, I'm assuming you guys can attest to this, the less and less time you spend on things you're really good at, right? And you may have an entire...
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Right, you probably have an entire days where it's like you have an A, B, C, D, and like most of those things you really don't want to do, right? Like it could be a long endurance piece, or it could be snatching, or it could be ring muscle ups or strict handstand push-ups, whatever it is. And that's something that I see a lot with people who are more in that aspiring range. Is there's kind of three categories really. There's the one people that just like don't do it, right? If they're bad at handstand walking, they just don't do it. And they're kind of accepting they're never going to be very good, right? The second group of people is what I think is more common, and that's the people that if they're bad at handstand walking, they will do it, but they'll do, again, the class and then something from comp train and then like a 10-minute EMOM after all of that stuff to like kind of, again, just check it off the box. But what Paige is saying of like, hey, if I'm really bad at 30-minute rows or salt runners, do a ton of that stuff, like that's my focus for the day. It's not like I'm going to do all this other stuff that's kind of cool and CrossFit-y, and then I'm going to like just tack on my weakness at the end. Like that's sort of what you're focused on.
Because then people make excuses too. Well, like I didn't do good at handstand walking because I was tired from all my other stuff.
Right.
It's okay.
Right. You could have just not done all that other stuff or done it afterwards. So last few things here. So again, I think maybe a misconception that a lot of people have with people at your level is that maybe you just started doing CrossFit and you were super good right away. So maybe each of you can share a story either currently or in the past with a particular skill or maybe energy system level that you struggled with and sort of how you kind of overcame that, or if you haven't but you're still getting better, sort of what helped you improve that.
Sure. Before CrossFit, I used to just go for I'm talking like 7-mile jogs, and that would be my workout. So like I came into CrossFit thinking, oh, I'll be great at the running parts. Like, I was running 7 miles a day for like 3 years. No, I suck at running. So you asked me to like sprint 2 miles, and it's just awful. And so that's something I've been working on. I didn't come in good with the longer distance cardio pieces, and to this day, still not the greatest. Like for instance, I just did the competition in Dubai, and we had a long desert run. And I can tell you, I could not see many people in front of me because they were so far in front of me. So Evan from Training Think Tank and I have been, we sat down last week and kind of went over all my weaknesses, which there is still a long list. And that's all I've been doing, and that's all I will be doing mostly for the next couple months. So if you think you're great at everything, you're probably wrong unless you're Matt Fraser.
You got a couple of seconds or something, right?
All right, I have a pretty good story. 2016, when I learned I qualified, it was like maybe 3 or 4 weeks before regionals, so I really didn't have much time. And we found out strict muscle-ups and strict handstand push-ups were going to be in there. Well, gymnastics are not my forte. You give me a heavy barbell and I will back squat as much as you want. So it took a lot of... Sorry, my cat. She wanted to get out.
Okay. My dog's looking at the snow right now. It took
a lot of practice and a lot of skills and drills to be able to do them. A lot of crying, a lot of frustration, but you have to do something hundreds and hundreds of times before you are actually good at it. So, and that's not even to say I'm still good at it now. I still have to practice these things and work on my positioning. And, but the cool thing was it was that 10 rounds of that heavy Nate, 4 strict muscle ups, 7 strict handstand push-ups. I think you had to get through 1 full round to hit the minimum requirement. And I was nervous and scared that I was not even going to be able to do that. But, adrenaline kicks in and you have the support of your family behind you watching and just everything in that regional stadium. And I got through like 4+ rounds or something like that. And it was probably one of the proudest moments I've ever had. So it just, competition shows you that you can do so much more. You just really have to put in the time and be willing to be frustrated and hit plateaus and have setbacks. It's kind of the biggest thing is you have a setback, you have to find ways to push through it and ways to work around it until, injuries heal and stuff like that. But like I went from no strict handstand push-ups to finally being able to do them on a deficit. So like that's a big deal, like a 4-inch deficit. So yeah. Like that's a long way. I think it's cool.
Yeah, I think it's cool to see even people, someone that's been to the CrossFit Games as an individual, had moments where it's like, I don't know if I can do a strict muscle up or do a strict handstand push up at one point, obviously. That was 2 or 3 years ago for you now. It's not going to be, you're not going to go from no strict handstand push ups to CrossFit Games in 6 months, right? But it's a very long journey. But again, it's not like you guys started doing things. You're like, oh, what are these things? Muscle ups? You're doing set to 10. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's still a long journey for people, even though they see you now, it looks like you're just very, very talented at what you're doing, And last 2 things we have down here. So obviously the 2019 season's very, very different. Andrea's already competed. I guess it was technically 2018, but as part of the season. So again, we probably could do a full hour plus on all of this stuff, but keep it like relatively short on what your guys' kind of general thoughts are on, pretty much the regionals going away, and now the process of going to the CrossFit Games is to go win a sanctioned event, which used to be just more off-season type things. Now it becomes like an actual part of the season. And kind of, did this change your competitive plans? Obviously, you guys don't need to give away all your secrets here, but did it change your competitive plans? What are your thoughts? What are your strategies for this year on how you guys are going to make it back?
Okay, so yeah, like you said, I already did one of the sanctioned events. Not gonna lie, it's fun to do these sanctioned events, and now that they actually like hold some merit going to the games, that's cool. However, I don't think like for team purposes, it's that wise of a decision. So I did the Dubai one, and there was absolutely nothing team related in that whole entire competition.
Right.
So there were no 2 athletes working in sync or ever doing anything together, let alone 4. So the team that made it was definitely an individual athlete team.
Right.
So, and I think when they get to the games, I mean, it's going to be all team related events. So I just think it's kind of a learning curve for CrossFit at this point. And maybe next year there'll be some rules maybe regarding what they need to see at these events. And it might be the same for individuals. I mean, I know like certain people can go and crush one event or like one sanctioned competition and maybe go to a different one and just get destroyed. So I think what regionals did was kind of leveled the playing field for everyone. And that was great. Everyone was doing the same workouts. And now it's just, you don't know the workouts before you go to these events. So it's just where you go, you have to get lucky enough to get events that fit your skill set.
Yeah. I think
kind of like a gamble.
Yeah, for sure. I do think this first year will likely be much different than everything else, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, what you mentioned of it is it's intelligent to use that to your advantage, right? You really don't know this year. I mean, you kind of know, like Wadapalooza is going to have a swim, right? And maybe I can't think of anywhere that's like landlocked that has a sanctioned event, right? But if there is somewhere, okay, yeah, so like it's probably going to be less likely there's going to be a swim there, right? Maybe they can do something indoor or whatever, right? But you kind of can maybe historically see, okay, the Africa one always has like heavy barbell stuff, and this one does more endurance stuff, and you're going to see people sort of dictate that out, and maybe CrossFit will step in and kind of it'd be hard to like do that, like you have to have a heavy event or you have to have an endurance event or whatever. But I think it'll be interesting too. I think also the political thing is going to be interesting. Me and Paige somewhat talked about this last night of when you get to the later end of all these events, right? Like the sanctioned events, I think there's 15 or 16 this year. And you get a lot of these, especially teams, because there's going to be a lot of good athletes qualifying with teams, like previously individual athletes. You're going to just see these hodgepodge of teams at the end of the year of just like these two people didn't make it, and this person was going to go individual and didn't make it, and this person, like, has never done team before, they're all going to go to Granite Games in June and just try to make it a last chance. So there's a lot of rules of, like, maybe, you know, how many different teams you can be on, and can you do individual and team or whatever. But yeah, it's very, I think team is probably the biggest question mark. There's so many variables with that. Individual still kind of like go there and win sort of a thing, but team is a little bit more all over the place with.
And who has the money, like who has more money to go do all these different competitions? Like I can tell you, I'm not going to be flying to London and then Africa and Iceland. There's just no possible way.
Right.
Where some people, they have the money and the time, and that's great. But so where before it was like you had the one shot and that's it.
Yeah.
I think most of these sanctioned events, until I think my experience grows a little bit more, will be more of getting prepared for my main season, which will be the Open now, as it has been. So, but now, you know, the Open doesn't take you to regional. So the Open is the Open. That's it.
Right.
So that'll be my biggest focus this year, to try and get down. I think I was like 76th and then 90 something these last 2 years or something like that. So I've been in the top 100 for 2 years, but there's still a lot of in between there. So, you know, one rep literally can jump you up 20 spots in a workout. So this year, that'll be my main focus. These other sanctioned events will be the experience, and just keep growing and getting better and finding what works.
Right.
For me, what fits well, what doesn't. I kind of like that the sanctioned events are location based, you know, like Dubai has the desert run, Miami's going to have obviously a swim, maybe more than one, because you have to be able to use your fitness, you know, like at the games, you know, team is the same way. You don't know what you're going to get thrown at you, and it's going to be everything and anything. So you have to, you know, hit these different events to experience that, which I think is pretty cool. But you also have to be smart on which ones you pick and choose, because if you're trying to do 6 of them, have fun, because that's going to burn you out.
Yeah.
Think about all of those qualifiers. And they're all like kind of blending in, like Wadapalooza and Dubai were at the same time. So I feel like that is something that CrossFit has to, I don't know, maybe balance out a little bit better, is the timing of them.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead. I was gonna say, I'm not gonna lie, I'm super confused too. Like I hear about a new qualifier every day. I feel like I don't know when the online qualifiers start and end. Like I feel so confused.
Yeah,
I just am waiting for someone to tell me, like, hey, sign up for this. You're gonna do this. That's what I would love.
I'm really sad about regionals too, because it's such an intimate setting compared to the games. So like, you could literally cross the finish line and like your whole crowd is right there in front of you. Whereas at the games, you finish or, you know, you get time capped or whatever, but you're like searching around for your people. It's hard to find them.
Right.
So that, I love that aspect, because that always kept me, I don't know, my heart was always there, like 100% more. It was just, you have them right there counting on you to get across that finish line. And that, you know, that was accountability for me. And personally, I loved it.
Right.
So I'm sad about that.
Yeah, and I think even for the people that are trying to go to sanctioned events and qualify, if you're if you live in Canada, if you're Vellner and you go to Wadapalooza and try to qualify, like he's gonna have like 5 people there, 2 people there, right? Like it's not gonna be. But if he goes to like the Canada regional, he's gonna have like his Canada fans there. So yeah, it definitely does. Much like a traditional sport, you have like home and away games. You know, you really don't have a home game anymore unless you're like a fan favorite kind of everywhere you go. So I didn't really think about that too. But as far as a competitor aspect, I think it does. It changes your enjoyment maybe a little bit of surrounding that. I guess Andrea has Granite Games, so that's helpful.
It's in South Dakota this year.
It's in what?
Wait, it's in South Dakota?
Not even in Minnesota. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Surprise. Also, in Dubai, I had 1 fan.
You had a fan in
Mom
Dubai?
And Dad?
My dad.
Oh.
Your dad.
I thought it was like a random person that knew you in Dubai. Okay, so...
no, I mean, it doesn't, the thing is though, is like you can be mad or upset or happy about all the changes, but you just have to embrace them for what they are and see how the year plays out.
Right. It's not going to change back, we don't think. And yeah, from my understanding, there is no team for the Open, so the sanctioned event, it could change, obviously, we don't know. But it could be like, surprise, you can have a team that Open now. But yeah, so Paige is referencing, as an individual, you can qualify if you win a sanctioned event or if you're top 20 in the world during the Open. There's also been nothing that I've heard that if you won a sanctioned event and you're also top 20 in the world, does it go to 21, 22, 23? So we don't know any of that. Very few people know the answer to that. So we'll just...
Or like, can we grab Matt Frazier for a team and he just lets us win and then replace him?
Yeah.
I already made it. Great question.
That would be a good question.
Yeah, if he hears this, hit me up.
Okay. And then the last thing I have down, more of a fun thing. If you guys have one cheat meal, so maybe like the first thing you ate after the games, or hypothetically, if you could have had anything after the games, one cheat meal, what would it be?
Mexican, always Mexican. Smothered burrito would be great with some chips and queso and a large margarita.
Okay.
I like boneless wings and stuff. I've really been craving Chinese food. So like bad Chinese food, you know?
The Yanshin.
I haven't had it yet, but like I'm waiting till after Wadapalooza. See, I'm being good, Greg.
That's not that many.
So,
that's not far away. It's not that far away.
I know, exactly.
I don't know if there's good Chinese food in Miami.
I love Cuban food. Absolutely love Cuban food. So that'll be my go-to. I know I'm staying with like Meredith Root and Alex Parker and their teammate Caroline Prevo. And we're in like Little Havana. So I'm going to find a little hidden gem of Cuban food. So if you guys know of anything who's listening, you let us know.
Cuban food. Cuban coffee I'm down with. I don't know what's in that, but I've had it every time I went to Wadapalooza. And it's amazing. So that's all I have for you guys. I really appreciate it. Any last words for the listeners? This was very good.
Listen, if you don't have a coach, you want one, sign up with Greg.
Bam.
He's great.
I didn't even pay him to say that. Wasn't even on the script.
Doesn't have to.
All right, we're going to log off Instagram. Thanks, guys.